Hi everyone, and welcome to this episode of Classroom Impact with me, Kylie, and my sister Lilia.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm really excited about this episode today because Kylie and I are going to be talking about explicit instruction, which is an approach to teaching that we've both found has a lot of impact in the classroom. Looking forward to this conversation and anything that you might get out of it today.
Yeah, so Lilia, when was the first time you ever heard about explicit instruction?
We had a phone call when you had first started using it. So I remember you being really excited because you had been teaching some students who had fallen behind because of COVID lockdowns. And you had made a spreadsheet that you were really excited to talk to me about, and it sounded like an amazing spreadsheet. So you were tracking your intervention students on this spreadsheet, I think at every lesson, or testing them regularly, and you were finding that they were growing in their learning so much, so quickly. And kids who normally would have difficulty grasping new concepts were picking them up and were retaining them over time. And you were so excited about this growth. And then you started to talk to me about how you were teaching them. And at first I was horrified because I thought that sounds like robotic and the exact opposite of what we've been taught at uni. You know, that's not working together in groups and constructivist learning and all that sort of thing. You had them sitting in at desks in rows, and there was lots of backwards and forwards and a lot of explicit explaining, and they had little whiteboards that they were holding up and showing you what they knew, and it sounded really strange, but I was excited to hear you talk about how they were learning. And so then that kind of hooked my interest, even though it sounded weird. And then the more you talked to me about it and why you were teaching that way and how what you were doing was helping them to learn, it started to really make sense to me. And after a while, it just sounded like common sense. I thought, yeah, okay, that does make sense. And then I was really excited to start trying it in the classroom. So you gave me some explanation of what I could do, and you sent me a couple of slide decks that you had made and advised me not to change them and not to design them and make any changes. You said, trust me, don't change anything, just give it a go. So I literally I didn't have any whiteboard, so I went to Kmart and I bought some of those dry erase pockets, and I put some white paper in there, and I gave the kids a whiteboard marker each and got them sitting on the floor, and I started doing that explicit explaining, breaking things down into little steps and stepping them through, guiding their thinking and getting them to write the answers to my questions on those dry erase pockets and hold them up. And then I could see right away which students were understanding what we were learning and which ones weren't, which was great. And just went from there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so no worries. So you found the first thing was that you could actually see who was learning, but did you see actual results in like them learning faster straight away, or did that take a while?
I think the immediate difference that I noticed was that I was able to adjust my teaching in the moment based on what I was seeing on those dry erase pockets, which was great, because if they didn't get it, I could reteach it. And if they did get it, then I could either just have them practice a little bit more and move on, or move on to the next step. So yeah, that's the thing I noticed immediately. And then over the course of a couple of weeks, I was noticing that I was able to do what I needed to do to enable all of the students to get the new concept, rather than teaching a new concept in, say, something like maths, and then finding out a couple of weeks later when we'd done an assessment who had gotten it and who hadn't. So being able to see in the moment and adjust my teaching was a game changer for me.
And then you got a bit of coaching?
Yes. So I'd been trying it for about probably 6 months, before the whole of the system that I work for implemented a strategy across the whole system to coach and enable teachers to take on explicit instruction as the pedagogy. So it was exciting, and I got to have coaching from an external coach, and that just took it to the next level. I was able to learn a lot of the theory behind it, and that was really helpful. And then also our system provided professional development days, like full days, at least once a term, with guest keynote speakers, and also little workshops that you broke into to practice and learn things specific to your stage area or subject area. So yeah, lots of support then, and coaching, and given the structures to be able to develop it. It's been 3 years that we have had the external coach come in.
Wow, that's
And
gone quick.
yeah, it has gone quickly. It doesn't seem like that long, does it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we had the external coach come 5 times a year for a full day. And then I was given the chance to be trained to be one of the coaches right from the beginning of those 3 years, helping my colleagues to start to implement some of these approaches. And yeah, we've been collaborating and growing together as a school. But yeah, it's been really, really great. And we are seeing those results in our standard testing, in NAPLAN and PAT testing and all those things. We're seeing real improvements across the whole system and in our school as well.
So how long did it actually take to see the improvements across your whole school from when you first started coaching?
We did it for a year, and then the next year we could already see a big improvement in the students'
Okay.
results. So when was the first time that you heard about explicit instruction? Where were you, and what did you think when you first heard about it, and how did you get started in it?
Yeah, well, I've done it at 2 different schools. The first one was interrupted by lockdown, so I only really got a bit of coaching from that particular company, and it was just a bit of a starter. But then the second school I went to, they'd actually been doing it for a good 10 years, and it was really embedded in their school. So that was when my jaw dropped. I just saw, how good it could be. And I just, I literally thought I'd landed in dreamland. It was just absolutely amazing. And yeah, that school, I have to acknowledge them because you know who you are, and you've really sparked something in me that will go on for a really long time. I just felt like it had been a long time since I'd been challenged as a teacher that much. And I thought, wow, finally something I can sink my teeth into, because one of the things they said to me is that it takes a good 3 years. It's interesting to hear you say that you've been doing it for 3 years, but it really does take a good 3 years for you to build up the skills as a teacher to be able to do this well. And I thought, wow, something that I can actually do to really improve. And one thing I noticed was the school didn't want anything else of me except to develop this skill. And I thought, wow, of all the things I've volunteered in schools, computers and music and stuff like that, I thought, finally, I'm not giving out so much in terms of all different areas, but I can just concentrate on one thing. And they gave me so much support that I thought I just have to concentrate on this one thing. And it was just amazing that I finally had this situation. I was able to watch them, get feedback, which I didn't mind at all. It was a bit confronting at times because I do tend to be a bit of a perfectionist. I sometimes don't like to show my hand until I feel like I can do it really well.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to change that and to be able to show weaknesses and get them out in the open so that I could really do something about them.
So when you were being coached then, because you came into that school that was really nailing it, and then you were kind of really upskilling very quickly, what were some of the first things that you felt when you were being coached? Because you had these people who were really kind of superstars at using this approach. What were some of the kind of insecurities that you felt, and how did they start to dissipate as you started to build your skills? I'm interested to to hear that from someone who's jumping in.
Yeah, because we got really different situations. You're kind of building it from the ground up, whereas I went in there with kind of everything done for me, but it was really me who, was trying to catch up. But that's probably the first thing I noticed was I saw these teachers teach and I thought, wow, how do you get so much meaning across using so little words? And I thought, I really want to get good at that. And so I just watched them. And then I thought, I'm just going to have a go. And, they were really accepting because they were so confident, I suppose. They were really accepting of any mistakes. And it was always put across, constructively with feedback. So probably me knowing the content would have been the biggest thing. So I thought, you can't just get in there and sort of wing it without looking at it. And so I just thought, really, I've got to look through the content first and almost know what slide's coming next, so that I can be really concise with my words. So that's probably the first thing. Because they were so happy to be put on the spot and they were happy to, show any weaknesses as well, I was happy as well. So it was really the culture that really supported me in that. And that's really different to any other school I'd been in. Teachers just wanted the classroom to be their own domain. And, so that was really different, but I was more than happy to go on that journey with them.
That's one thing I've noticed at our school too, as we've implemented this, because everyone's learning together, you really have more of a focus on continuous improvement. And you do find yourselves being super encouraging, and we're all just trying to get better. And so we don't expect ourselves or anyone else to be perfect. And we're sharing ideas and getting excited by each other's ideas. And because you're going in and observing each other too, you go, oh, I like the way you did that. And so you can incorporate that into yours, or they might say, tell me more about how you do that. And so it is kind of an upward spiral of continuous improvement. And it's exciting and energizing, I think.
Absolutely. And just like picking one thing to work on it at a time. And they said lots of really encouraging things, like for years, we all had one goal and it was just pace, like to see if we could pick up the pace. Because at the beginning, I think my daily reviews, the first feedback I had, my daily reviews were sort of going into like the 30, 35 minutes. And that was like double what it was meant to be. And they were saying just a quick 15 minutes. And I was used to taking more time because I wanted to do things well. But it was totally different to that. It was, be concise and just touch lightly on every single topic and fly over the top of it and just do a 15 minutes. So that was my biggest thing, was cutting the time down, keeping it light and just keeping it to 15 minutes. And they said, that for years and years when we'd ask each other, what are you working on at the moment? Everyone would just say pace. So I thought, okay, I feel really confident and comfortable that that is my goal. And it has been my goal for a fairly long time because it's so hard to get.
So you've said the words daily review there. Let's just unpack that a little bit for anyone who doesn't know what a daily review is. And some people call them different things. Some people call them warm-ups or daily reviews. So let's just talk about what a daily review is and what we're trying to achieve with that, because there are so many elements to what we do with this explicit instruction model. And of course, we'll have episodes about each of those elements. This is a bit of an overview today, isn't it? But let's just start with, what is a daily review and what are we trying to achieve with it? Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yep, sure. So what it's meant to achieve is just to be a consolidation of explicit lessons that have happened in the past. After you've taught a concept explicitly and you've gone through with high support and you've done the I do, we do, you do. The I do where you do it all together. The we do is where you withdraw the support slightly and you do things together. And then the you do is where they've really seem to have a really good grasp of it, and then you throw them some more challenges to apply those concepts. So after you've done these explicit lessons, you're kind of doing a little snippet of all of the explicit lessons that you've done recently just to consolidate that learning. So in the explicit lessons, they've got it. And now the first thing that you're doing every morning is a little snippet of each of those that you've been teaching recently, so that they can keep retrieving that information and it gets put into their long-term memory after they've learnt the concept.
Let's have a think about what some schools may be doing in terms of, can we stay with just talking about maths for now, just so we can be really specific? Some schools, I guess, with maths might have a scope and sequence where they teach addition for 2 weeks in term 1, and then they might move on to fractions for 2 weeks, and then they might go to multiplication for 2 weeks, and then, geometry for 2 weeks, and even to the point where you do a pre-test and then you teach it for a block of time, and then you do a summative assessment, and then you move to the next concept. And then what we find is that that's kind of the only time that we've had focused on that specific concept. And then the kids move into the next grade or the next year level, and the teacher the next year says, these kids have been learning addition for 3 years. Why can't they do it? And so what this does, this daily review and interleaving the learning, so that you're not learning about addition, say, as an example, in one block. You're learning about it interleaved, so you're learning addition a couple of days in 1 week, and then maybe 2 weeks later you do some more addition, and maybe 3 weeks later you do some more. And then we have this spaced practice. So those daily reviews are reviewing what they've learned so that it doesn't get lost. So they learn the concept, and then the daily reviews help to embed it and keep it in their long-term memory, so that it's there to retrieve and use anytime they need to use it for problem solving. So even just forgetting it and relearning it is helping to strengthen that long-term memory.
Absolutely. And it's not just the retrieval of the things you taught them. It might be actually just getting that automaticity for basic maths facts that they're going to use for all different strands of maths. So it could be skip counting, where they practice it you have a little bit in the daily review every day where they skip count. It could be maths facts, it could be times tables, all of those universal things that you're going to use for every concept, so that a little bit of repetition every single day puts it into their long-term memory. So flicking the slides as fast as you can possibly push the button, so that they really, and putting them out of order, so their brain's really retrieving it, is, how you get that long-term memory.
Yeah, and again, if we just stay talking about maths, when they have that automatic retrieval of a maths fact, what that does is it allows the students to be able to learn new concepts while not being busy having to calculate that fact. So let's just move then to talking about cognitive load theory, because that's a really important reason for why we want that automaticity.
Absolutely. So it's one of the roles of the teacher in EI is to curate the knowledge that is required of students, because we know that if you just flit from concept to concept without strengthening these skills, the load of what's required the student to think about is just too great. And often they'll just give up because they think, I don't want to work out 7 times 5 and then apply the concept as well. So what you're doing is you're putting these maths facts into their long-term memory so that they can retrieve it with ease and don't have to put any cognitive load into that, so that you're saving all of their brain power for being able to apply the concept. So it's like you're curating what it is that you want them to put their effort into, so that it's setting them up for success in the best way possible.
So one of the things that I heard you talk about from the school that you worked at that really nailed this was some self-talk that the students would learn. So they were little rhyming phrases that would help them to understand what to do when they were practicing a new skill. And to me, that seems like it also removes some of their cognitive overload, because they're not having to remember what to do. They can just let that little self-talk script work through the problem. For example, I remember one that you told me about, which I think is brilliant, is if you are doing or teaching the subtraction algorithm, there's a little saying. So you're looking at right is the right way to go was the first thing. So you're looking at the right-hand column, and then more on top or more on the floor. So you're looking at the numbers and seeing which is bigger. More on top, no need to stop. So you just do the subtraction. More on the floor, go next door and get 10 more. So that's reminding them to go to the column on the left and borrow. And the next one was numbers the same, zero's the game. So they knew that if it was 5 take away 5, then they would put a 0 underneath. And the kids love saying that, more on top or more on the floor, go next door and get 10 more. So even I've been using it with my students, and even as we go through it, it's like a little chant that they enjoy saying. And if they just say that, they don't have to think about anything else other than that. And it's concise and it's exactly what they need to do. It's just stepping out the process for them. So that was one example of ways to reduce cognitive overload that I really enjoyed hearing from you.
Absolutely. And, different schools will have different things. I have to credit that school for that. What we used to call self-talk, but we moved on to call it success criteria, because we really realized that that's essentially what it was. And so if you've got the number facts in their long-term memory, plus you've got the success criteria in their long-term memory, it's really just putting them together, which is the least amount of cognitive load for the students. It might be during an assessment where they see an algorithm and they just freeze and they think, well, I've done this before, but what did I do first? They literally can just say that chant and move through it's like a checklist, move through them to solve it. And because they say it at the beginning of every lesson, it's really in their long-term memory as well. And I did actually hear some people say, in the beginning when they were first trying it out, why are we getting them to memorize these, irrelevant things? It's just another thing for them to memorize, and that's going to make their cognitive load too large. So it's another thing they've got to remember. But no, if it's in their long-term memory, it's retrievable straight away. It's already there, and it's just a guideline for them to move through. So that was a big thing throughout the school, as well as the fact that because it was across the whole school, every student in the school knew it. So it was the same success criteria for every concept. And because they'd all grown up with EI, the year sixes would know that the year twos are learning this success criteria, and they would remember it and still use it themselves, even with year six work.
Mm.
Yeah, really, really great to have that unification across the whole school.
I like the way that you've said that about, whole school approach, because as we're talking about this idea of reducing their cognitive load, that really prompts me to think about all of the things that we need to set up in the classroom to remove the distraction from the learning. And that has to be a whole school approach as well. For example, we would need a whole school approach to behavior management, and we would need a whole school approach to how we are going to engage the students so that there's lots of backwards and forwards, so that we're requiring a response from them at least every 30 seconds. Mostly more than that, so that they're staying engaged, because whatever they pay attention to is what they're going to learn. And what we need to do is we need to have every student thinking. And we talk about how memory, which is what we're trying to achieve long-term memory for these students, memory being the residue of thought. So if memory is the residue of thought, we have to have them thinking, and we need to be ensuring that every student is thinking, because we don't want to leave any student behind. And so how do we actually set it up so that the students are paying attention and engaged, cognitively engaged. We're not entertaining them. It's not engagement in terms of being excited or entertained. We actually want them thinking. So whole school approach to behaviour, whole school approach to resourcing the classroom so that they have what they need. And yeah, that has to be across the whole thing. Otherwise, you're trying to do this approach and the students will be thinking, what are you doing? The students in the other class aren't doing this. But when it's consistent and we have common language, really makes a difference to how it just becomes what the students are used to doing, and they are so happy to be successful, I think. I love getting the
Absolutely.
comments. Oh, I'm really understanding this now. I've had trouble,
Yeah.
with maths before, but now I'm learning. They love it.
And also even reducing the cognitive load in terms of the student asking themselves what is required of me at this school. So if I'm to be a successful learner, what is required? And often if that's absent, the students will actually try to make up what's required of them. So in terms of behavior, learning behaviors, if you just set that all out for them and, say, in this slide, we're answering as a whole class. In this slide, I'll pull back a bit and you can write me an answer, or I'm going to cold call a student. So they're ready for that and they know, as well as their bookwork expectations, so that they can put the knowledge that they've learned across in a really clear and concise way. They don't have to make that up. You've set it all out for them and they can really relax and just follow along the supports that you've given them, so that they only have to concentrate on applying the knowledge that you've given them.
Yeah, so we've worked very hard, don't we, to create that sense of safety, so that if we are picking a non-volunteer to give an answer, then they know that they will be supported to be able to answer correctly. So most of the time when I'm asking a question of the student, the answer is either on the slide, or the whole class has just said it as a choral response, or we've just done a little pair share and they've heard the answer from their partner, or they've been able to practice answering with their partner. So by the time we get to the point of picking a non-volunteer to answer, they've heard or expressed the answer in 3 different ways, and they can then be confident to say to say the answer in front of the class.
Absolutely. And also, you get to know each of your students so well. When you see a response from them every 30 seconds, you can imagine that it doesn't take long until you can predict fairly accurately what they know. So most of the time you're cold calling, you're answering a question that is just slightly beyond the level that they're already at. And whether it's going to be a challenge for them, or whether you're asking them something that they definitely know, just to reinforce and to celebrate with them the knowledge that they already know. And interestingly, at this really high-performing school that I was at, one of the things I really loved was that the principal used to come into your classroom just at any time during the day. And I just, think, I wonder when it's going to be today. I hope it's in this lesson. And he would just come in and sit up the back with a big smile on his face. And sometimes, this is absolutely astounding, but he himself would actually know what each student knew, and he would actually be the one asking the question. He'd like to challenge them a bit, or he would like to just celebrate with them what they already knew. So that was something that was a real joy for him, I'm sure, and a joy for the teachers. And I often think about PDPs, or professional growth things that we have to fill out. And this was worth so much more. Him coming and seeing us grow as teachers was worth so much more than us spending, hours writing a 3-page document on our goals and how we were going to achieve them. It was actually him seeing us grow every day. So that was worth way more than writing it on paper.
Yeah. And so are you saying that he was able to ask the students questions and know where they were at because he was in your classroom so often, and he was almost at the point of knowing as much about where the students were at in their learning as you were, because he was there so frequently? Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. And sometimes he'd do it in assemblies too. He'd have a little joke and he'd just cold call a student and say, we had a particular student who had autism who had this amazing skill that he could tell what day of the week it was if you just asked him a date. So sometimes in assembly, he would just say, what day of the week was, this date last year? And the student would just say it straight away. And it was just a way of the principal saying, I know you and we appreciate you and we celebrate you, which is also a part of EI. You really want those students to feel known and to feel valued and cared for, because that's another thing that makes them love learning. And it also makes them really devoted to you as the teacher and their school, and just creates that wonderful culture that we all want, where we're all excited about the learning and we're excited about how the part that we play as a team member. Because I actually have heard EI talked about as a team sport, that we all play a different part. And that's just also so what we're trying to build, this wonderful culture.
And I guess sometimes I hear people criticizing explicit instruction or that approach and kind of saying, well, if you're just always having students sitting in rows and always just giving you back what you've taught them, then you kind of develop these students into a mindset of just always being given what to learn.
Yeah,
And
spoon feeding.
so they don't actually practice the skills of research and inquiry and working together in groups and, teamwork and all those sorts of things. So can we talk a little bit about how there's a difference between what we do when we're teaching them the foundation knowledge when they're novices and how we move them towards being able to do more research and project learning once they have developed more of an expert or mastery of and developed that schema of ideas, but we're not throwing them in the deep end right from the start and asking them to put together their own learning path or discover things. We're actually teaching them first. And then once they have developed that foundational knowledge, then we challenge them with those higher order thinking tasks.
Yeah, for sure. One of the big things about EI is starting off with prior learning. Even since they're a baby, students have developed schemas. So they've taken information about how the world works in some way, and then they've actually moved that information and connected all of those different facts together, to make connections between those facts that they've learned. And that's called their schema. And, we know from theory that we're all adjusting those all the time. So we're changing our schema based on new information that comes in. So starting off with their prior learning and then giving them the supports that show them what's required of them as a learner. So channeling their energy in the right direction, using that information that's gone into their long-term memory already, and then challenging those schemas so that they can rearrange them to, take on the new learning. So for example, it might be at the beginning that they learn maths facts and they're able to retrieve those at lightning fast speed because we've not only chanted them in order, we've then given them to them out of order so that their brain has to think really quickly with the support of them actually knowing them off by heart in order. So then it's challenging them and it's taking away those supports and challenging them a little bit more. And then at the end, you're able to give them problem solving, like a real life problem. So you're saying, okay, use your times tables, but actually apply them to sharing or, dividing. And so it's them actually having to apply that in a much deeper way. And they might have to adjust their schema to be able to do that problem, which is exactly what we want. So it's giving them all the tools and then setting them up for the most amount of success to be able to use their creativity and their flexible thinking, develop flexible thinking with maths. And what we find is this is a big equalizer for students. It's not leaving some students behind, like the ones that struggle a bit more and need more repetition. It's not leaving them behind, as I've found that in my teaching in the past. My teaching has been limited by this. If students don't have that background knowledge, they've been forced to apply it straight away, and they've had that gap that they've had to work with. Whereas this is setting every student up with the tools that they need and then guiding them towards applying it. So, yeah, that's what we need, more equaliser in education so that everyone comes along.
Yeah. And I guess that also just reminds us that we understand that everybody learns the same way.
Yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind challenging you on a bit on that. So
Yeah.
we know that with Gardner's theory that there were all of those different ways that students learn. Remember, there was like kinesthetic, there was so when you say everyone learns in the same way, how do you factor in Gardner's theory? Because I know you're really passionate about this sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that when you hear Gardner actually being interviewed about this, because the idea of different learning styles has been now understood to be a myth, when they have asked Gardner, he said, I never said that there were different learning styles. I said there were different intelligences. So yes,
Wow.
people have a natural tendency to be strong in a certain area. But yes, he will say, I never intended this to be taken as someone's intelligence is then their learning style. So yes, we all do learn the same way in the sense that we take information in and we organize it and then store it in our long-term memory, and then we retrieve what's in our long-term memory to be able to use it in our working memory to solve problems. And so now that we know that, we can really focus on being efficient with our students. It's the most efficient and effective way to teach students when we've got them in a classroom together. I reckon, though, if you and I, let's have a little thought experiment. Let's say, for some reason, well, let's kind of, transport ourselves back in time, because I love time travel. Let's say we went back to when our own children were school age and some disaster happened and they couldn't go to school and we had to homeschool them. Knowing what we know about explicit instruction, would we homeschool them using this explicit instruction approach, keeping in mind that we've got maybe 1 or 2 or 3 kids that we're teaching rather than a classroom of 24 or, in my case, 28 this year? We know that it's most efficient and effective for a classroom of students, but it's also how people learn. So how would we do that if we were homeschooling our kids, do you reckon?
Yeah, I've thought about this before because, there might even be some listeners today who are homeschooling parents who want to get a couple of tips from this. So I've thought a lot about this, and I think if it was me, and one of them might be kindergarten aged, another one might be year 2 and year 4, say, for example, I would actually, because the self-talk is the same across the whole school of the experience that I've had, for example, sentence writing. For kindergarten, the self-talk or the success criteria is to start with a simple sentence. And if you want to work out a simple sentence, you start with a who and then a what.
Oh, can I show you something? I want to show you something that I saw. So we introduced these little actions, gestures. So I'll see if I can do it on the screen. So when we say a sentence has to have a who and a what they did. And so
cool.
that way, the little younger students, they can do it as a gesture. What does a sentence have? A who and a what they did. And then as the students get older, you change it to subject and predicate. So you can you can use the body gestures even to remember things.
The brain science actually says that this does support their schemas as well. So with EI, that's one of the big things, is actually using whole body learning, which is physical as well as mental. So all of these supports are all leading to the one thing, that it's just making it easier for students to retrieve and apply information.
Sorry, can I just interject? For anyone who's just listening and not watching on YouTube, what I did was, when I said the who, I put my hands out, palms up, and then when we do what the who is, just you put your hands out, palms up, and then what they did, you wiggle them side to side. But
Yeah.
go to the YouTube channel and watch it if you want to
Yeah,
see.
for sure. Awesome. So then after kindergarten, you start with a who and a what. Then after that, you move on to compound sentences. And then you move on to a where or who, which is the dependent clause at the beginning. So when you're moving it into a complex sentence.
Mm.
So there's all these supports. And I would actually teach them all the same thing, but just different levels. And so they'd still be chanting things and doing whole one voice as a group. So and doing it fast paced as well, so that you're getting that pace up and getting that automaticity, which helps it go into their long term memory. But then I would just add layers after that. So I definitely would not teach any other way than using EI from now on, just because I've seen how efficient it is with your time and their time, how supportive it is, how equalizing it is. And it really helps them to develop that sense of mastery.
You kind of do this stuff naturally when you're working one-on-one with a student. You do the I do, we do, you do naturally, and you get them practicing things so that they develop that not just accuracy, but that fluency, which I would think of as speed as well. So, yeah, I think it definitely would transfer over to teaching one student or a couple of students at home.
Absolutely. I remember thinking, even if you're teaching your own child how to ride a bike, I know exactly what you mean. First of all, you say, look at that person who's riding a bike, look where their feet are. So you model it first. And then you give them little supports, I suppose, where you say, keep your eyes on one spot or different supports, and then you hold the bike and you run along with them. So you're giving them supports, and then gradually, as you can see that they're developing that balance, you take your hands off. So we naturally do this as adults, where we start off with high support, gradually pull back as we can see them, and we don't pull back until we see them actually showing some understanding and skill building. And then after that, we let them do it by themselves, and then we have a big celebration and go, yeah, you did it. We naturally do it. It's just in a classroom setting, it's just pairing it back to simple again. I remember telling a colleague about EI and showing them, and this colleague just said, it's really just taking everything back to the basics and stripping back a whole lot of things that we added because we thought they were going to help us. But they're actually cluttering everything up, and it's really just zeroing in on what is most important and just sticking to that. So I suppose it supports our previous episode of doing less better.
Yes, absolutely. And as you were saying that, it just reminded me that was one of the things that made the most impression on me in that first slide deck of math slides that you sent me, that you'd created and said, here, just give it a go, just give it a try. The way that everything was reduced down to such small steps was very different for me. I wasn't just trying to teach a whole concept. I was having to break it down, and that's what made it successful in the classroom. That was the thing that allowed all students to be able to get to the end of that lesson and be successful in the you do part, where they're just practicing on their own, because that step thinking had been just a little bit at a time and no one was getting left behind. And so that's the biggest change I think happened when I first started using this.
Wow, fantastic.
I think that we could probably, like we said, break this whole explicit instruction thing out into the elements and really do an episode on each of the elements, because there's so much to it and so much to each element. I would really enjoy having a conversation about each one. And hopefully today we've given a bit of an overview. What about we do something that's a bit more specific? And I know that you've got some slides that we can have a look at. Can we have a bit of a conversation and maybe go through them a little bit too? I'm just going to switch over to what you've got here. All right. So we can see your slides on the screen now. If you want to start talking us through what you've got there, it says Literacy Daily Review for those people who can't see the screen because you're listening. So just talk us through, first of all, before you change it to the first slide, I'd love to hear from you, what is your intended purpose for this daily review? What are you hoping to achieve with it, first of all?
Yeah, so as I said before, just after the explicit lessons, just flying over the top of concepts and consolidating them. So it might be grammar, it might be phonics, it might be comprehension, it might be spelling, all of those things that have had explicit lessons before. So it's just consolidating those and providing a few examples, just providing them with that next step of challenge to develop those schemas.
Okay, so everything in this review, you will have taught them before to the point where they understand it and can do it well. And now you're just coming back and practicing it to keep it in front of mind or to get them to use that understanding again so that they don't lose that knowledge or understanding or skill.
Absolutely. And, there's something to be said even for hundreds of repetitions, because there are some students that struggle to learn, neurodiverse or learning difficulties that need over 100 repetitions of something.
Or
And
thousands. Yep.
yes.
Mm.
And most students in the normal range would be 24 to 40. And then, that's fine. Those students are incidentally in your middle row.
Mm.
Ones that need more repetitions in your front row, there might be 3 to 5 of those students. There's dots on the floor. They know where their spot is. And then your students that learn very easily and quickly and need more extension are in your back row.
Yeah, that's interesting that you're describing how you would set up your classroom. And I think it's going to be different for different year levels too. I think in the lower primary, you would have students sitting on the floor. What we find in upper primary is that we have them all sitting at desks in rows. But we still do put the students who need the most support at the front and centre. And then in the middle row, the students who will be able to get that independently. And then those students who might need a bit of extension would be sitting at the back, and then we'd be able to provide that for them.
And, the layout of a classroom really does reflect the teaching philosophy of what the teacher knows works. So rows that are all forward facing, no sort of desks in groups in the class. I've even seen, when my own children went to school, I even saw desks around the perimeter of the classroom with students facing the wall, which was one of the more bizarre layouts. But definitely rows facing the front. And, I've heard people say, wow, don't the students know that they're being categorized in terms of how easily they learn, and doesn't it create stigma, and don't students, look down on students for being classified as a learner that needs more attention? And, that's really up to the culture that you build in your class. And it's really up to students accepting diversity and accepting that we're all different and we all bring different strengths, and knowing each other and appreciating each other for who they are as individuals, and not even really making a big deal of it, just getting on with the business of learning.
Yeah, what I notice is when we used to have students sitting in a group all facing each other, there's so much opportunity for distraction, which creates that cognitive load. So
Yes.
we try to remove as much distraction as possible. I even tried having more like a horseshoe shape around the outside and then some forward-facing rows on the inside. And that didn't work either because the students on the sides of the horseshoe were looking across the classroom at other students. And so I had to even change that to all of the desks facing forward, because I'm not setting my students up for success if I'm putting distractions in front of them. And in our school, we have purposely decluttered the front wall of the classroom. So it's got a whiteboard, the TV screen, and not much else.
Or only things that are actually going to support them. So we want high support, low distraction.
That's
and
right.
There's so many different ways you can do that. So things that will support the students, it might be all the trigraphs, or it might be all the quadgraphs. So whenever they need to, they know exactly where they are. So only things that students refer to frequently that will support their learning. And obviously you can take those away once you really feel like they've got them in their long-term memory. But yeah, anything they're using frequently.
Yeah. Well, do you want to start talking us through some of these slides then? And if you don't mind, I'll interject and ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is an example of a literacy daily review. And I've seen this when I've done casual days in many other schools. And, every school's on their own journey about where they are. But as I said before, I have worked at this really high-performing school who had just continuously improved the lessons based on how the students learnt. So after 10 years, you can imagine that, they really refined it and paired it back to the most effective things. So I'm only going to show about 10 slides. And for each slide, you'll probably tell that there's going to be, more of them, but just to give you an idea and just to give you an overview. So this was a Tuesday one. There was a progression across the week. So we did them 4 days a week, so Monday to Thursday. And then Friday, there were things like sport and music and assembly and things like that. So we really only need to do these about 3 or 4 times a week. And this was just the first 15 minutes of the day. So students come into the classroom, sit straight down on their dots. We had a really efficient way of handing out the whiteboards. So the student at the end of each row was right next to the tray of whiteboards for their row with markers and erasers. But basically, the student at the end put the whiteboards down next to each other and pushed the end one so it would slide across in front of each student. Highly efficient. And everyone just sat down and waited for it to come to them. And they would put a whiteboard marker on each one and an eraser. So often the students were set up and all ready to go before I'd even done whatever I needed to do to start the day. But
and those routines really help to make the most of all the learning time, don't they? So we're not wasting 5 minutes in a transition. We actually can make the most of every minute we have available.
Yeah, and the message that the students are given is your time is important. And, reducing any distractions that students might get up and go around looking for something. They know that their one job is to come straight in and get set up for learning. And because the learning had been successful, they were keen and they were coming in expecting to learn straight away. So they'd literally come in, get their whiteboard marker, look up at me as if to say, what are we going to learn today? Or what's going to be in the daily review today? So we'd just mark the role quickly and then we would get straight into it. Usually there was a little bit of an introduction of the teacher reminding the students what's required of them in terms of learning behaviours. So what do I want to hear? The students would say one voice. What do I want to see? And they would often say game face on. So this is your game face, like you're ready to learn.
Wide-eyed.
Yeah, that's right. And just really focused. And we'd often say that it's a team sport and that everyone plays their own part. But it would just be, a very quick reminder. So this was Tuesdays, and Monday would be sort of reminding them of the concept. And then as we went along, it was throwing different challenges at them in terms of applying. So first of all, we'd start off with phonics. So it might have they've gone through all the digraphs, and that might be on a Monday. Tuesday might be trigraphs and quadgraphs, which is what you're going to see today. And then you'd go on to applying them. So students would say this in one voice all together as a whole class. A trigraph is 3 letters making one sound. I'm just reading it out for those people who can't see it. Moving on to the next slide. We can see the letters D, G, E, and an example of this trigraph in a word underneath his bridge. That's just a little bit of a support. And then we can see vertically down the left-hand side each of the vowels. So the students on this slide would all say in one voice, j as in bridge, ij, oj, udge. So they're applying that vowel, just preceding the trigraph. And using this language, digraph, trigraph, quadgraph, is really just allowing the students a language for how to articulate concepts. And I'll tell you an example of when I found this really valuable is I did have a student who was one of those students who did need a whole lot of repetition. And often when she was reading and decoding, and I was just working with just her in a small group, she'd go along to try and decode a word, and she'd be trying to chunk the word into different, parts as she knew digraphs and trigraphs. But sometimes if she didn't retrieve it, she might go to sound this out and say d, j, and I'd just say trigraph, and then straight away she'd say j. So it was a language that I was able to use to support her. And because she had repeated it so many times, she knew exactly what I was talking about. So these concepts, when they're in long-term memory, have real practical implications to support students' learning. We'd then move on to the quadgraph. So I've just changed to the next slide, and students all say in one voice as a class, a quadgraph is 4 letters making one sound. And then we'd move through the quadgraphs, and I've just changed to the next slide, and we can see AUGH, and then 2 examples of the different ways that or the different phonetic expressions of this quadgraph. We've got laugh and daughter. So we'd say arf as in laugh or as in daughter. So the students are memorizing not only the quadgraph, but the different applications of it and examples.
I know that sometimes people use resources like this, or maybe have been given a resource like this to use, and they find that their students are going through it and they're droning. How do you make sure that this is something that the students are energized about, and it doesn't turn into just, we've got to do this because we've been told to do it, and we're going to drone it, and there's not much motivation or understanding behind it of why this is important to do?
Absolutely, because I have actually been in schools that have done direct instruction with, say, spelling programs, for example. And I actually have heard teachers say, oh, we've got to do this. All the kids hate it. They're just droning, repeating back what I've said. Not much seems to be going in. And I've seen that before really fall over. And the difference with this is that we're developing automaticity, which is lightning fast. That's our goal. So you're always just one step ahead of them in terms of your pace, judging which level they're at, because obviously their brain needs to be there before you can change to the next slide. But you're just slightly faster than they can, and their brain can actually work faster than their mouth can speak. So you want to be on that clicker. It's a skill that you have to develop as well. And it was a real challenge for me. Your clicker has to be A1. So you're listening to them and you're just going slightly faster than the pace that their brain's working at. And so sometimes you can even set them up at the beginning and say, okay, it's teacher versus student. I'm going to see how fast you can possibly go at this. And it's a bit of a challenge of it's almost like a race. And we know that students get really energized when a teacher might say, let's race each other, to really, get that excitement going. And it's the same with this. You want to say, okay, let's see if I can throw you another challenge, maybe do it a little bit faster. Let's see if we can improve it a bit more. So they've really got a goal, and you're giving them little hints as to how they're going, or you could get them to rate themselves. Okay, what do you think we could rate that as? We did a 7 yesterday. Do you think we could step it up for an 8? So you're really offering them a pathway forward that's, letting them actually, or it's assuming that they actually want to be better learners. And kids innately do.
Yeah, we just need to create the environment in which they can do well, and they will.
Yeah, offer them the challenge. Yeah, so moving on to tracking and blending. Now, when I was trained in EI by this amazing school, It was we all know that we used to teach students to sound out words letter by letter in the past. That's really confusing, as I suddenly realized, because chunking words is way more effective into digraphs and trigraphs, because as with the quadraphs we just saw, there are some ways if we ask students to sound out words letter by letter, it's setting them up for failure. So they know these digraphs and trigraphs, all of these phonics, they know them in their head. It's just spotting them in words. And this is a bit of applying the knowledge that they've already learnt. Students say this slide all together in one voice: tracking and blending. Track with your eyes from left to right, say the sounds as you go. This is an example of the success criteria. They say this each time they do this. So the next slide here is a nonsense word. Now, some days from Monday to Thursday, we put real words in there, and some days we do nonsense words. So this is an example of a nonsense word. And each syllable is written in a different color, even though the chunks of the words are written without any spaces in between them, just as a normal word would be. So what we can see here is incontrovertly. And each one of those chunks in that word is in a different color. So the in is in blue, the con is in green, the ter is in a different color, us and lee. And I know that from thousands of times making these slides that it's sometimes you run out of colors. But yeah, definitely. And this actually taught me a lot as a teacher, because I'd never actually made up nonsense words before. But this was a real challenge to me. And at first, I was thinking, gosh, I've got to make up all these words. And I actually didn't have a good grasp of how words were formed until I started making these slides. But, I could see prefixes, and then it just took me a while to actually realize, and it really helped me to know my content a lot better, actually making the slides. So
It's great.
So what students actually, and I also found it really fun as well. I looked forward to it. But what the students do in this slide is, first of all, they say incontrovertly. So they say it once as a chunk and then once fluently. And then you move on to the next slide. So there might be, however many slides of those. Sometimes when I'm modifying slides in the morning, I might say, well, students are really good at this and I want to cut the time down. So I'm going to change it from 5 slides of this down to 3. So I just hide 2 of them. So hiding slides is a really quick way to modify the lessons based on what the students achieved the day before. So the next slide is actually grammar in context. So this would have been following a grammar lesson where students can identify verbs and nouns and adverbs. And they would have already known the hints of how to work out the place in the sentence that each of these were. And I'll read you out the first sentence on the slide. It says, I can tell that you incontrovertly did that. And it's got all the punctuation, and that incontrovertly obviously was the one that we just had. And I would say to the students, write down on your whiteboards the nonsense word in there. So it's really asking them to retrieve knowledge of their vocabulary. So they've built up their vocabulary so much that they know which of these words are real and which ones are nonsense words. And the great thing about nonsense words, it might seem like it's really irrelevant and silly, but it's really asking them to apply their knowledge without any support from what they already know. So it's isolating the very skill that you want them to know, or you want them to show their knowledge of.
And what year level would this be for?
Yeah, good question. Actually, this is year 2. Although having said that, because this school had been operating for 10 years, I found that the content for year 2 was well beyond other schools, year 2. Mm-hmm. Often if I did a casual day at another school and I used some of these slides, I would change the year group. So it just goes to show how effective it is. Yeah, but particularly, students were very fluent in using the grammatical terms. So first of all, I'd say write down the nonsense word. And then I would say, tell me what grammatical term it is. And then I would say, how would you know? I might cold call a student and say, Sophie, tell me which one's the nonsense word. And then I would say, what type of word in grammar are we talking about? What grammatical word are we talking about? And she would say, I can tell that it's an adverb. And I would say, how do you know? And she'd say, well, because it's got "ly" and it's also preceding the verb.
And if I could just break in, for me, being in a school where maybe this hasn't been something that they've been doing for years and years, and if it was something that we were just introducing, in that specific instance, our students would know that if you're sitting on the left-hand side of a pair, you are partner A, and if you're on the right-hand side, you're partner B. So I would say something like, partner A's tell partner B which is the nonsense word, and then they would turn and tell their partner B, and then I would do our call to response, whatever it is, tick, tick, and they say boom, or, 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, or we've been doing Scooby-Dooby-Doo and they have to sing back, where are you, something like that. And then I would say, okay, partner B, now tell partner A what type of word that is, and then they would tell them it's an adverb. Then I would get out my popsicle sticks and I would be able to pick a non-volunteer, and I would be confident that everybody has had a chance to hear the answer to those two questions. So this is my chance to check for understanding now by picking about maybe 3 students to answer that, and then I can give them a chance to tell me the answer, because all students want to answer our questions. Give them a chance to answer in front of the whole class, but then no one has really had to just feel like they're singled out or spotlighted. They've had a chance to practice it or hear it.
That's so good, because not every school's at the same spot. And sometimes if you go to a really high-performing school and say, and see, you think, okay, well, that's all fantastic, but how did you get there? So I think that's really important, that you have pathways to get the students to this, and pair sharing is a fantastic way to do that, and something that we'll also go into depth in another episode.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide is retrieval of phonics. So we have actually done phonics in an explicit lesson, and this is one of the ways that students absolutely love applying their knowledge of the different phonics. So this slide says all the ways to make O. We don't normally read this out. As soon as students see this slide, they know to get their whiteboard straight away, and they draw a grid, which I'm going to show you on the next slide. This grid that I put into this wouldn't normally be in the Literacy Daily Review. This is what I would write on the whiteboard as a teacher. So what I've got is 2 grids here, and in the top one, I've got headings of all the different ways that you can make O, and this is what the students would tell me. So I'd just do an empty grid on the whiteboard, and I would cold call a student after giving them a little bit of time to make up their own grids, and they'd write down all different word examples that have this O sound in there. And at the top of each column, they would actually write the spelling of that different way of making the O sound. And then underneath in the column, it would be an example of a word with the O spelt in that way. So I would just do an empty grid. I would then cold call someone and say, tell me one of the words that you've got. And a student might say, I've got the word go. And they would say O as in go. And then I'd say, fantastic, cold call someone else. They might say, I've got the word bow, B-O-W, and the O is spelled O-W. And then I might say, I might cold call someone else. Now, interestingly, I would expect the back row, and you will find this, the back row of students will be the ones that really want to show you the more challenging ways of spelling O. But yeah, basically we go through all the different ways, and it is absolutely amazing how many more there are than you realize. And it's really the power of all of those brains working together. And this is one of the more enjoyable slides that really bonds us together as a class, because we can really appreciate the different input that we all have. And I suppose this is where it's the team sport, and we high-five each other. Wow, I didn't think of that one. Then we move on to segmenting, and this is where students apply their spelling rule for the week. So on a Monday, in the explicit lesson, we would go through the spelling rule for that week. And then each day in the daily review, we would apply that spelling rule in a different context. And on this day, I was giving them real words, and the spelling rule for this week was IE makes the E sound. And so I've got a list of about 5 words that I don't show them on the screen. So I usually turn the whiteboard off in this slide. Or as you can do with PowerPoints, they can see the slide. I make another slide after that with the words on it, and they just see the blank one where I can see the next slide that's coming up on my screen. And so I say, okay, write the word spiel for me. Spiel. And they have to, there's a little self-talk at the top that says, say it, clap it, tap it, say it as you write. So first of all, I say the word, they all say it back to me in one voice. Then they clap it themselves, and then they tap it, which is where they chunk the word and tap it on their whiteboard so that they can visualize where each of the chunks of the words are going to be. These are all the supports that set them up for success. And then as they write it, they whisper it to themselves or just say it in their head as they chunk each part of the word, being able to apply that spelling rule. So they know that when they get to the E sound, it's going to be spelled IE. Later on in the week.
So they're tapping each sound that they know that word has, and they know that they have to represent that sound with either a graph, a digraph, a trigraph, or a quadraph, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So they would say spiel. So they're chunking it out into graphs or digraphs or trigraphs. So yeah, that's all supported by their tracking and blending that they've done before. So we're really using that long-term memory knowledge to apply it in ways that they're going to use every day with spelling. So some days it will be real words. The real challenge is when it comes to nonsense words. So, and that's a great challenge for me as a teacher. I love making up the nonsense words. So again, they know that when they come along to it, because some students will know off by heart how to spell these words. So it's really not applying the spelling rule in as great a depth as if they're using a word that's completely out of context. They don't know it off by heart, and they're having to apply that spelling rule in real terms.
And it's not a bad thing that they know how to spell a word automatically, because that is what we're aiming for in the end. The end goal is that things will be retrieved automatically from their long-term memory, and they'll just be able to do it, or read it or spell it straight away. But yes, we're teaching them the skill of how to build up to that point, and they need to be able to apply that rule to unfamiliar words as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because they will get unfamiliar words, and nonsense words are a way of giving them practice with unfamiliar words. Then we move on to high frequency words, and the first day of the week, they're spelling lists. I think there's some program that has 30 different or more than 30 different lists of words that are the high frequency words or most commonly used words. And these are basically just committing them to memory. So it is building the vocabulary. First day, we look at the words and we discuss the meaning so they understand in depth what the meaning is. Then the next day, we say it and spell it and say it when they can actually say it. So each time they see a word, they say it in one voice, and then spell it in one voice, and then say it again, and then move to the next slide. So they spell it while they're actually looking at the word. The third day, Wednesday, is saying it as fast as you possibly can. And this is the real challenge, where you say, I'm going to flick my clicker as fast as I possibly can. And you really want to challenge them. You say, okay, that was a 7, that was an 8, just like we did, I spoke about before. And then the last day of the week is saying it, spelling it, saying it again, but it's them spelling it while they're not looking at the word. So they're really having to apply that spelling, and that's as fast as they possibly can too. So it's really like a gauge as to how much the learning has gone into their long-term memory. And there's just a bit of an overview of the Monday to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, as I just outlined. And then the final apply is you just saying any of the words and then writing it in a sentence and spelling it correctly in that sentence. They make up their own sentence, which requires their knowledge of the meaning of the word. in a grammatically correct sentence, and they all hold it up at once, and that's when you can give them immediate feedback. I usually try to say things in neutral terms, fix this or just swap those around. So you're just giving them immediate feedback and, yeah, just giving them that support. Comprehension, this is really easy to actually make the time blow out. So I really had to restrict myself. You can easily end up doing an explicit lesson on comprehension in the middle of a warm-up, which makes the warm-up way too long and really drags it down, takes away from the purpose that it's meant to serve. I particularly wanted to show you a visual literacy one because you do a different type of comprehension each day. But this was a wordless picture book, which we did discuss the different colours and what they mean in visual literacy. And the terms on the right there of the features of visual literacy, we did recite those each time beforehand. So we've got subject, salience, camera angle, symbols, vectors, lighting, gaze, and gesture. And we would actually recite the definitions of each of those at the beginning of each visual literacy lesson, which was once a week. And then we would go through and discuss how the illustrator had used those concepts to convey meaning in visual literacy. And then we would move on to the Bloom's taxonomy. So asking questions about literal, inferential, and critical. Different questions here, remembering to describe the gaze of the girl in the yellow dress. And we discussed that as a whole class. But sometimes even this, the time blew out. So the feedback that was given to me on this, which was really helpful, was break it up into, a couple of questions a day. So only asking 2 questions a day. So however you can cut the time down so it still remains that fast, quick, light overview where the pace is maintained is up to you. The very last slide is, as you'd say to the student who was riding the bike who could finally ride it by themselves, you'd celebrate, hooray, great job, thumbs up, high five. So these kids love to see that one at the end saying we made it.
Well, that's great. Thank you for going through that. And I think what we'll do is we will make those slides available for download. We'll put that in the description below the YouTube video because it's always great just to be able to grab something and give it a try or modify it and give it a try in your classroom when you've heard about something that you haven't done before and you think that makes sense. I could really have some impact on my students' learning using that. We do want to be able to access that really quickly and easily and give it a go. So we'll do that. And we will do some more of these as we go in other episodes as we focus on specific parts. I guess I just wanted to say that I also have seen really good results from that direct instruction model as well. And I know that some people are not fans because it's scripted, but as you've been going through these slides, I can see the similarities in what you're doing with some of the direct instruction programs that we use at our school. And I find that the scripted direct instruction really helps to make sure that every student is accessing the same learning regardless of who's teaching the lesson. And when your goal is to maximize the potential for the students to learn, it doesn't just become, oh, this is just a script I have to read. It's something that actually takes away the teacher's cognitive load in that moment. So all you have to do is focus on how the students are learning, noticing which students are getting the concepts and which need a little bit more support. And it takes away all of that thinking and decision making you have to do in that moment. And you know that this program, because your school has chosen it or your system has chosen it, you know that it's been vetted to be quality. And so you can still put your own energy and warmth into it, and you can still encourage the students with that real sense of healthy competition and energy, and isn't this great that we're learning and celebrating the learning. But yeah, it's actually great to have a lot of that cognitive load taken away so that you can focus on your students. So, yeah, I thought I'd just put that in as well.
Yeah, and do you think there's specific subjects that actually benefit more from direct instruction? Like the one that I've heard the most is spelling. What specific KLAs do you use direct instruction for?
Well, we use scripted programs or direct instruction programs for literacy in our school. So we actually use Initial Lit. We also do use spelling mastery, and our students are getting great results from that as well. And I know that in the younger grades, we are starting to introduce a direct instruction maths program as well. And, initial results from that are that it's really helping the students learn as well. So, we can prune back some of the planning time by using these programs and allow ourselves to just focus on our teaching. Obviously, there would be some subjects where you wouldn't want to use a scripted program, especially all the social sciences and art and creative subjects. But there are benefits to both students and teachers, I think, from using consistent programs. And I've noticed even lately a lot of schools in groups are producing slide and booklet units, so that, let's say you have a group of 4 schools and you've got 2 teachers in each school teaching the same lesson. So you've got 8 teachers. If you have slides and a booklet, all of the students in each of those classes is responding in the same way, because they're filling out, maybe writing down vocabulary definitions, and then completing sentence stems and doing specific problem solving in that subject. And the teachers have the slides. So it's consistency across classes, so that all students are benefiting from getting the same content. And it doesn't depend on what you remember to put in the lesson that day if you're just kind of talking through. So
it also doesn't depend so much on which students have a huge prior knowledge and which ones don't. So it's a bit of an equalizer in that way.
Yeah.
But I've got 2 questions for you. One of them is, if you were a leader in a school where there was a direct instruction program that was failing, i.e. you heard, as students, the bell rang and it was time for students to go to their class or their group for this particular this is assuming that you've streamed the students across, in ability levels, and they go to a different teacher, which I think a lot of people do with these a lot of schools do with these direct instruction programs. If you saw students walking, dragging their feet, and sort of even some of the teachers' aides, you heard like a little bit of talk of, the kids don't like this, what would be the things that you would change to make the program successful again?
I would gather the staff together and really have a conversation about why we're using this, how are we going to work together to be successful in using this specific program to empower the students to learn. So one of the things that I really love about having a coaching model in the school is that people aren't just given things to use and said, just make it work. We actually work and collaborate together. And so we are upskilling people in a way that allows each of us to become the best teachers that we can, improving every day, just constant improvement. So I would imagine that if we have a culture of constant improvement in the way that we teach our students, then the fact that we have been given the resources of a direct instruction program would be part of that way to improve. And having people go and observe each person teaching one of those lessons and collaborating to set goals, so that you're not just having a stale program that you're teaching or reading from. You're actually using those lessons to improve your own teaching as well as improve the students' learning. I feel like that would energize the people who are using it. And if you're working in a school who introduces that kind of program and it's not really the way you want to teach, are you working in the right school for you?
I suppose what you're really saying is stale versus dynamic learning.
Yes.
So,
Should have just said that from the start.
Yeah. Well, you did say it. Yeah, okay. And the other question I've got is, if we all know that the great thing about explicit instruction is that those back row of students, we can give them more challenge. So we might make up a harder question on the spot, or we might give them a place where they can show just how deep their learning is by asking them open-ended questions. Maybe at the end of a segment before we move on to the next one. We also know that the front row receives more repetition, more support. They might have a teacher's aide sitting right next to them. You're supporting the front row, the teacher's aide is as well, while the others are working on other things. That's how we differentiate. Indirect instruction, is there still room for throwing greater challenges at that back row, or giving the front row greater support? Or if not, how is that catered for?
That's a really good question. And I probably would only be able to answer that in terms of the ones that I'm using. So let's take spelling mastery, for example. The students are put into groups of exactly where they're at in that year. So they're working through a program streamed into groups, and those groups we work on them being successful all the way along. So if they're needing to be extended, they should be in a different group for that one.
Okay.
But maybe you would be using direct instruction in a class that's not streamed into groups. That could be possible. And I actually heard about this the other day. I haven't actually done this yet, but this is one thing I'm planning to do in the coming weeks. Walking around the classroom with a clipboard, and on the clipboard you just have a pad of Post-it notes and a pencil or pen. And so what you can do with that is, especially once the kids get to the you do section, so you've gone through the concept, you've checked for understanding, you've seen that maybe you've taught the whole class to 80% of them getting it right when they show their answers on their whiteboards. So you know you've taught it to 80%, which is kind of the terminology that we use. And then...
And sorry, when you say 80%, do you mean 80% of students got it right, or all students got it right to 80%?
80% of students got the answer right of the question that you were using to check to see whether they've gotten it.
And 20% got it wrong.
Yep. And then you work with those students who didn't get it right until they also are able to get it right, so that you're bringing the whole class along. So you've modelled it in the I do, then in the we do, you're doing examples together as a group. And
this is an explicit lesson, isn't it?
Yes, sorry, explicit lesson. Co-constructing, co-working on these problems, and you're slowly reducing the amount of support that you're giving until you can see that they pretty much can get it, and then you check for that understanding. If they all get it right, then you can move on to the independent practice, which is the you do. But if you've still got some who are not getting it, and then those kids up the back they could move on to the independent practice straight away, while you then keep reteaching those kids at the front who need that extra explanation. But then once those front kids are able to move on to the independent practice because they've now understood and can do it independently and get it correct, then you can walk to the back with your clipboard and Post-it note and just write a little challenge on it, just very quickly, add another digit, or, what about this? And so just write it and just stick it on the desk in front of them. So you're not actually distracting everyone from the things that they are focusing on to practice. You just write down a little challenge on the Post-it note and put it in front of them. I remember at uni they used to say, prepare these little slips of paper beforehand, and you could just put one on the desk in front of the one student that might scaffold them a little bit, or another one might be an extension. I'm like, who's got time to make little slips of paper beforehand and have them for every lesson? But I thought we could totally do it with the Post-it notes and just write it in the moment and put it on the desk. So I like the idea of just placing something in front of a student that they need to either help them or extend them, or well done, I can see that you've really understood this. Just give them a little note to celebrate. But I don't think that we should be preparing them and printing them and cutting them all up into little things beforehand. So, yeah, that's another little way that I'm planning to be able to provide that individual extension in the moment based on what I can see my students need.
And is that in direct instruction programs?
Well, you could do it in anything. I mean, with the direct instruction, it's best to stick to the script. However, if you are needing to extend someone, then just giving them a little Post-it note that gives them a challenge, that's not going away from the script. That's providing the differentiation that you need for your students.
Absolutely. And one other thing along with that is when you actually create the slides yourself, or even if you're modifying them or adding extra slides, that's when you get a really good grasp of what's the next skill for them to go to after the one before. So that's when you get really quick at being able to write those little Post-it notes, because you've created the slides before, and it's almost like you've got a little continuum in your head as to what is the next skill in that particular concept, and how to think one up really quickly. So that's something that you feel that contributes to your mastery as a teacher too.
Yes.
And I have to say, since I haven't been creating these lessons as often, I sometimes find myself missing it, because it's a creative outlet for me, almost like a little STEM challenge where I'm like, okay, let me try this idea, especially if something hasn't worked, which is rare in EI. But, let me try this thing. And did that work? No, it didn't. And you see in the moment, because you see how many students get it right. And then, okay, I'll try a different thing. So we all know that STEM challenges are really one of the more enjoyable tasks as a teacher.
Well, it's been great to have this chat with you, and I'm excited that we've just kind of dipped our toe in talking about explicit instruction. There are so many elements to it and lots of areas to explore. So I'm looking forward to maybe breaking it down into its elements and doing one episode on each element so that we can talk about it. And today I think we've really enjoyed chatting about how it helps us to really see the difference in our students' learning, and I guess a little bit about how we've started to implement it. What is it about the conversation today that you feel has been beneficial just to start this conversation?
Yeah, definitely. I was really interested to hear more about direct instruction, because I haven't done that much in direct instruction, and probably similar to how you felt when you first learnt about explicit instruction, I probably felt about direct instruction, where I think, I'd like to have more input, creative flair into it. But yeah, I was really keen to learn more about that and how it's worked really well in your school. And, I'm just excited to share the knowledge about it, because, I've definitely been a really strong advocate of explicit instruction in the past, and I will continue to be. So I just really enjoy sharing it, because it's made my teaching so much better, and it's been a challenge that I've probably wanted for a very long time. And, I'm sure there's others out there who feel exactly the same. We all want to get better. We all want our time to be worth more, and we want our time to be used more for better results. And we want the students to be better supported. We do actually want to see that we make a difference beyond the level of the parents' abilities. So if a child's from an affluent area where parents are highly educated, you can expect that school in that area to achieve a certain level of results. But the holy grail for us as teachers is to be part of a school where we are able to value add the students beyond their parents' education level. And that shows that we've made a real difference. And I know that the school that I worked at, the really high performing school, was one of the very few schools whose results reflected that outcome. And that is something that it's hard to get, and it takes you developing that skill and really working together as a team. And explicit instruction is the way that we can achieve that. So, yeah, basically that's our end goal.
Yeah. And I really appreciate the people that I have been able to watch and learn from in terms of teaching, or even just when I started teaching, just watching the way people set up their classrooms and those sorts of things, being able to watch YouTube and seeing ideas and listening to podcasts and hearing ideas. And I like the way when I hear other people talk about their ideas, it helps me to have my own, like it sparks thinking in me. And so hopefully through us having these conversations, other people can have ideas sparked in their minds. It's not like they're definitely going to want to do everything the way we do it or everything that we do, but even just hearing our ideas can spark others' ideas, and glad to be contributing to that conversation so that we can collaborate together. And having said that, we would love to hear your ideas. So please let us know in the comments of our YouTube episode here. We'd love to hear from you. How have you found using explicit instruction? Are you just starting to implement it? Have you been doing it for a long time? What advice do you have for us? And what questions do you have for us? So we'd love to work together with the people who have the same kind of interest as us, which is having the most impact in the classroom that we can. That's what we're in it for, is to get those students learning and being successful and feeling excited about learning.
And sharing the knowledge that we've got. I think traditionally in the past, we've sort of thought, I put a lot of work into that. I don't want to share it with other people. But I think we've all moved beyond that. And we know that anything that can make any schools, whether you're independent school, government school, private school, anything that we can do to help each other, to support students more and remove distractions, is contributing to everyone in Australia, our literacy and numeracy results moving forward, which we know is, particularly needed.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it and looking forward to the next one.
See you next time.
Bye.